The wall at Jericho was an impenetrable force for any army that was trying to overtake the city. But before even dealing with the wall, the attacking troops would first have to navigate their way across a 27-foot wide, 9-foot deep pit that lined the outer edges of the city. Then came the wall, 17 feet high, 5-foot thick mass of solid stone. If the attacking army managed to get this far without getting shot down by archers, all that was left was to defeat the well-trained Canaanite army that was waiting within. This was the reality for a young leader named Joshua and his ragtag Israelite army. These Israelites, who had seen an entire generation live and die while wandering through the desert, were tired, hungry, and facing what seemed like an impossible task, a hopeless situation. Now, I haven't lived very long, but I've lived long enough to know this, that running into walls is a part of life. And the bigger the wall, the more hopeless the situation can seem. The walls of sickness, loss, divorce, addiction, they pop up all around us and they seem impenetrable. And just like the wall at Jericho, these walls rarely stand alone. The walls of our lives are often accompanied by a deep pit of pain, suffering, and despair, and all the while an army of hopelessness attacks us on every side. The question is asked all the time, if God really loves us and is so powerful, then how could he allow these walls to pop up around me? Now, I don't pretend that I have the answer to any of those questions, nor do I want to pretend to understand just how deep or dark your suffering has been. I simply want to suggest that maybe God does his best work in seemingly hopeless situations. Because when I read the Bible, I read about people and characters, all who faced seemingly hopeless situations. In fact, I cannot find a single person who walks faithfully with God without first facing a hopeless situation. Adam and Eve ruined paradise by inviting sin and death into a perfect world. A hopeless case. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers for his pride and put in prison. A hopeless case. Moses was cornered on the banks of the Red Sea with the most powerful army in the world breathing down his neck. A hopeless case. Gideon was 300 versus 300,000. David stood across the valley from a bloodthirsty giant. Esther was a woman trying to gain a word as a prideful king. Daniel's roommate was a lion, and his friends were thrown in an oven. Jonah failed at his job and got stuck in a whale. Peter was a coward. Paul was imprisoned. The 5,000 had no food. Lazarus was dead. Timothy was too young. Abraham was too old. The youngest son was too foolish. The walls of Jericho were too strong. And Jesus Christ was humiliated, hung on a cross, and buried in a tomb, bearing all hopes of a revolution that was hoped for thousands of years. Everybody was ready to close the books on these stories. The end. Game over. But if there's one thing I've learned from reading the scriptures, is that we can never place a period where God has placed a comma. Because when circumstances couldn't get worse, when all else has failed, get ready, because that is where God shows up. Because Joseph became second in command. The Red Sea parted. Gideon won without lifting a single weapon. Goliath's head was on a platter. Esther spoke, and the king listened. Nineveh repented. Peter became the rock. Paul rejoiced. 12 basketfuls were left over. Turns out Lazarus was just kidding. Timothy built a church. Abraham built a family. The youngest son came home to a party, and the walls of Jericho came a-tumbling down, and Jesus Christ pulled off the resurrection, defeating sin and death. And the creation that had been marred so many years ago was now restored for all time. Because with God, what may seem like a hopeless situation is not only possible, it's favorable. Because only God can turn a mess into a message. Only God can turn a trial into a triumph, a test into a testimony, and a victim into a victory. His power is made perfect in our weakness. So let us rejoice in our trials and hold steadfast to this hope that we profess. Because he who promised is faithful, was faithful, and always will be faithful, no matter how hopeless the situation.